Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guildhouse. This is a weekly podcast in which I, your host, Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across the tabletop, RPG, and surrounding space. And this week, I'm delighted to be joined by Laura Evans. Hello.
Hello.
How are we doing this fine afternoon?
Good. I think good.
Yeah. I must admit, my go-to thing is when people ask me how I am, I do just hit them with the yeah. It's not.
I'll have to try that out.
Yeah, it works. It works quite well because it sounds positive, but it's open to interpretation.
How are you? Yes.
Yeah. I am. Yeah, on a scale of 1 to how? Yes. But for the people listening, Law and stuff like that, what's your involvement with the tabletop RPG industry?
I have my fingers in many different pots, and I'm trying to wriggle them. I'm not going to continue that sentence. That sounds terrible. Yeah. I am an artist, occasional graphic designer, occasional layout artist, editor, as well as proofreader, and sometimes do my own writing as well.
Yeah, I think you got art director as well in that mix.
Yeah, I've got art director at Ecstasis Games, which is my partner Kat and my company. He was there first. I just happened to get in because I also do it. And it was easier to just combine forces. So
I guess in trying to obviously untangle, I was about to use your untangle here, untangling all your fingers from all these pies. Which is I apologize. But
so many fingers.
Yeah. I've got like 20. It's really weird. But what was the first step you took in kind of, was it always like starting from art, or was it a dabbling like?
I've always dabbled. I have ADHD, and that means that I am a keen dabbler. Art is something that I always go back to, but at the time, which was 4 years ago now, I was also doing a fair amount of editing in what had been my day job, which was bid writing of all things. And it was a really weird time in my life that I got into RPGs, because I had been on this on the end of this massive 2-year-long depressive streak episode thing, and had a month signed off work while I was medicated, and at the very end of that month, it happened to coincide with going to the first year of D&D in a castle.
Interesting.
Which was, at the time, it was the very first year that they'd ever done it, and they didn't know really what it was going to look like. We had 5 DMs, and everything was slightly chaotic, but we had this beautiful French chateau to ourselves, and it was summer camp for adults.
Yeah.
And it was the most sort of grounding experience I could ever ask for, especially at the end of that month off. And coming back from it, a month later, happened to be Ashley Warren putting out her call for the first Uncaged, which Kat signed up to as a writer. I signed up to as a writer and an editor, and that sort of launched everything else.
Oh, I mean,
never look back.
It's a heck of an origin story.
What? Did you sign up as a writer? I signed up as an artist and editor. That's what I said. I signed up as an artist and editor.
I do like the kind of live editing.
This is the problem with having your spouse at the other end of the house.
There's a spouse in the house, but no, I mean, honestly, it sounds like a heck of an origin story, as if it's but no, awesome. And then obviously Uncaged being the titan that it is.
It never goes away.
Yeah, well, I mean, was it
in the best way?
Yeah, well, I mean,
it
wasn't the most recent, was it Uncaged Goddesses, meant to be almost like a send-off or a capstone?
Yeah, it was. I think of it as like a victory lap, where we did this thing. It brought so many new voices and faces into the industry, some of which are like thriving now and completely up and coming, like my spouse. I'm very proud of him. I won't make this all about Cat, but I know how hard you've had to
like
try and get him
I'm sure
on
at some
here.
point Cat will get his own episode.
But yeah, it's been amazing to see, and it was a joy to come together with these people that I didn't know. I had never met any of them or even heard of any of them a few years ago, and they're now some of my closest friends, like ever. I talked to multiple people that like multiple times a day throughout the day about all sorts of things. I've collaborated with them in numerous ways, and it was such a joy to not only see us come together again, but also bring in this heap of new people.
I mean, especially seeing like the Ashley Warren's kind of approach to things has very much been seemingly continue with the storytelling collective, very much about fostering new voices. And I feel like you can definitely see, like with almost like on a tri-monthly basis, you can point to a new intake of authors that are like almost directly as a response to, you know, their efforts. I'm kind of curious though then. So with the kind of with the first kind of Uncaged, what was like your first like art project like?
So Ashley was really thrilled with Cat's idea for his adventure, and as soon as I submitted my portfolio, she came back to me and went, "Hey, let's get you two collaborating," because obviously it was just shouting down the couch. So that was the one that I did for the first book. I think in that one we basically had one piece per artist, and then I did art for the second and third one, and then only edited for the fourth one, I think. And with that, it was a combination of going with the people with the concepts that I'd really liked, and going with the people that I really liked. Paige Lakeman was in the third volume and had been a friend for a few years by that point through the massive 5e Facebook group that we don't talk about.
rest in peace.
It's still there. It's just incredibly intimidating. It's massive. But we used to mod it together. And so as soon as I saw that she was in that volume and still available, I was like, gimme.
So I guess so did you have, like, with this Uncaged, did you have like a good amount of freedom then in kind of, because again sometimes when it comes to like art project, there is always like the kind of like thinking of like, we get an art brief, we then pass the art brief to said artist, and then the kind of
it was really a mixed bag, and I get the impression it was across the board as well, because it was really fine. A lot of us were taking briefs for the first time, and like I had done a few commissions before that, but nothing of the in the same line. And so it was a matter of like, with Kat it was easy because we know each other inside out and out, and I could just go through the adventure and go, I want to do this scene, and I gathered some references and we bounced those back and forth. With one of the writers I did, and I am completely blanking on who it was, and I feel terrible for that, but one of the pieces I did, I contacted him, and the immediate response was, yes, I want this scene, I want it framed like this, I want it with the Medusa, with the Medusa watching the adventurers come through with this huge room full of statues of people fighting. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to level up for this. and Paige didn't have a hugely concrete idea of what she wanted for her art.
Yeah.
So that was a matter of really just trying to capture the tone of the adventure rather than a particular scene.
So I'm curious then, do you have like a personal preference then between again, it sounds like 3 different parts of like hands-on kind of collaborative, like coming up with the art thing, one end of the spectrum of being like, this is what I want, and that middle ground of like,
it really sort of depends on how easily I engage with the material.
Mm-hmm.
There's some stuff where it's a huge relief when there's a brief, because I'm like, oh good, I don't have to do the heavy lifting for that.
Yeah.
I can focus on the other details. And there's some where it's almost disappointing because I will read through an adventure or whatever I'm illustrating and get such a clear idea of what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll talk to the artist and they have a completely different the author, and they'll have a completely different idea.
Yeah.
So it's give and take, and I'm flexible.
I suppose that there has to be kind of some level of that, because again, I guess it's again, what I love so much about like just commissioning art in general is that almost like translation of the idea you have in your head.
Yeah.
That me as a non-artist, I have a horse in my head, I will draw sticks, and that would be that would
hey, I will say, as an artist, those sticks are useful.
It's true.
Those sticks, if you present an artist with a stick figure, but it gives like the general framing that you want, or the very rough pose, even if it's just like a hand on a hip and a sword held high,
yeah,
it's still useful.
So I guess I'm curious then. So when it comes to like the process of like, okay, well, I have a rough idea of, you know, the framing, or what is that process like? Of like, okay, well, in some of these cases, you're literally creating creatures out of thin air. Where are you kind of like, what are your starting points? Is it very much like reliance on like, I don't know. I'm not
Pinterest.
I'm not honest.
Pinterest is always my first go. I will spend a good 10-20 minutes, sometimes up to an hour, just absorbing other content and other ideas that people have had, and different animals. Yeah. Especially if I'm designing a creature, I'll spend a while just examining different photos of animals or how they move, and generally just feeding my brain before I start pulling a mood board together.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if it's something that I have no idea, or the person that's commissioned me has no idea what they actually want, then I'll just send that mood board.
Yeah.
For Queer Coded, when I was working on Joel Axel for Oliver Dockshire, I first sent him just a bunch of different outfits that I liked and that I thought fit the vibe. And it was everything from like really ornate sort of Tudor clothing to kink wear and fetish wear. Yeah. And he went back to me and went, yep, good. And I made a beautiful slutty boy.
Yeah, because so Queer Coded was essentially, no, it's not quite, was it a retelling of essentially existing Forgotten Realms characters, but just
yeah. So a lot of it was sort of highlight. It was, I don't want to speak for Ollie for this, because that was his baby. I did several pieces for it, and I love that project, and I'm still baffled by the backlash it got. But what it basically was taking the elements of those villains that are so often queer coded, and in a very historical way, of like effeminate or secretive and manipulative, and highlighting those and kind of turning the knob up to 11 on them, so that they were the forefront, and so that queerness wasn't just put down to subtext.
Yeah, or like just subtly implied. Again, it is.
Yeah.
I guess it goes back to the term queer coded. It's using that as fair. Wow.
Queer people deserves villains too.
Yeah,
they're the funnest part of any story.
It's so much of like, I guess, conversations around particular parts of media often do kind of gravitate towards, you know, the protagonist and the kind of like villains that get kind of against them. So I'm curious then, across all the kind of the art pieces you've kind of been doing, then would you say that you kind of have like, I guess, like an art niche, or like if you had to summarize like the types of like art projects you kind of, you know, gravitate towards, is there?
I struggle with this so much because I want to do all of the things.
Yeah.
Like I want to do the big grand illustrations, and I want to do the niche character designs and the monster designs, and environments and terrify me. I'm working on it, but they still terrify me. So even with my style, it fluctuates so much depending on the project and the mood of the project. And like, it's currently locked in NDA hell, but I've got this one piece that I am in love with that's like this, unlike anything else that I've done, that's just this really watercolor stylized portrait. And I'm dying to show the world, and I can't.
I suppose that's kind of like, it feels like, I only really have like writers like analogies and stuff like that, but that sort of like evolving art style. Yeah. And, you know, that idea of like venturing out into, you know, potentially areas of like, I've never done this before, but you know, I want to kind of give it a go, is very much part of the journey. And I do hope the portrait gets to see the light of day at some point.
One day.
Fingers crossed. I'm curious.
It's a really cool setting too.
Geez, I have so many questions. Because so basically, I want to talk a little bit about Dreadful Realms. Yep. But then you touched on a little bit earlier and stuff. Talking about some of the editing work that you've kind of been doing.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if you kind of have like, what I guess, what is your approach to editing? Obviously, I don't know if that's a weird question, other than
no, it's really, it's a good question, and I think everyone has a slightly different approach. I come into it from, I try to keep a very outside view of it, of what I'm editing, and always asking myself, can I run this easily as a GM, but also, am I still engaged as a player?
Yeah.
There's a lot of new writers especially who end up just telling a story that the adventurers are sort of adjacent to, that it would roll on whether they happened across there or not. And same with, there's a lot of adventures that leave the heavy lifting for the GM, and they're already balancing a table full of gremlins.
Yeah.
And so you want to make it easy as possible for them. When I started writing adventures, I had the same problem of feeling like I had to be clever in how I told the adventure as well as what the adventure itself contained. But it's not that. You're not writing a book. You don't have to hide things from the GM. They don't need to be surprised.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
No, they shouldn't be surprised.
I think like sometimes there is that point of like, you know, you kind of want that big reveal for the players, and there's always that moment of like the DM go, huh. I too am surprised. I wasn't expecting them to be, you know, siblings.
Yeah. Oh no, what have I done? I have created a Luke and Leia moment 3 scenes ago.
But in fairness, I guess that it's kind of like I ties in nicely of being kind of like self-conscious, well, not self-conscious, but to identify like, this is a problem that I used to have. Again, I've trained myself to kind of, you know, work through it and stuff like that, and now I can kind of help kind of others through it. It's interesting because it's kind of developmental editing and stuff like that. It is that kind of like that flow, and
that's my happy place. I'm comfortable with copy editing. It's one of those things that I can sort of do in my sleep. And so it's enjoyable in a an easy, a fairly laid back sort of day.
Yeah.
But development editing is where my brain will hone in on, and I find that I have to train myself out of that for when I'm doing copy editing or when I'm doing proofreading, because I'm like, I'll be reading through something and the writing won't be quite how I would do it, but I'm not there for that.
No, exactly. Yeah. So I guess to go back to the earlier point then, what are, like, I guess some of the telltale signs that the adventure is currently kind of expecting too much of the DM, or is essentially a film with the players watching?
So making things too difficult for the DM is leaving things for them to figure out on their own, especially when it comes to things like NPC motivations or the backstory for why something is taking place. If they have to come up with that on the fly, 9 times out of 10, no matter how good a DM you are, it won't be as good as if they had something that they could draw from, because they might take it, they might completely change it, but in any circumstance, generally your second idea is always going to be a bit better than your first.
Yeah.
And so you put their first idea down on the paper for them. They can do with it what they like. In terms of editing to make sure that something is still engaging, it comes back to motivation. It comes back to making sure that they have a reason to continue with the adventure, whether that is because they have a personal investment in what's taking place, because they feel a moral duty to do so, which you have to be real careful of, because there are some really questionable characters out there.
Yeah, I feel like you can't really have the hinge of the adventure be like, you're the good guys, right? It's like, just do the good thing.
And sometimes, like in the campaign we've been playing on each week, you will have a group that just comes in and has a completely different viewpoint than what the author expected.
Yeah, I think it's like full disclosure. What was it? We're running through the Murder at Baldur's Gate, which, as the adventure is kind of written, fully expects you to go, oh yeah, we should like stamp on the anyone on the lower class and stuff like that, or we should strip them of their rights, and us as like a chaotic bunch, we're like,
we're just like, eat the rich.
Yeah. Is that and literally know when the adventurers are like, oh no, yum, I guess that's
we broke Bob's brain just a little bit. But
was it funny enough, speaking of Bob, or I guess sorry, RP Davis, as he's professionally known, is I must admit, so having had Bob edit, like developmental edit a few of my adventures and stuff like that, it is fascinating working alongside him, because his comments aren't in the nicest sense of, he's not afraid to call me an idiot.
I've caught myself on that a lot. I've had a lot of lessons in my old job as a bid writer. I used to regularly review things for our team, and there was one time where one of my teammates had handed me an executive summary to review, and because we were very friendly and very colloquial with each other, I went into it and my comments were harsh. They were things like, why have you written this? What does this mean?
Yeah.
And I only learned afterwards that actually it had been written by somebody outside of our team who had joined the company the week before.
Oh no.
Who came back with the comment, I don't know who Laura is, but they're terrifying. And correct.
Yeah. No, but I mean, that's what I mean. It's like, I wouldn't expect a first time project with an editor who I have no rapport with but that's what I love so much about, like, in my experiences having worked with a vaster range of editors, is you kind of you pick up their and sometimes it was things like, well, like Bob's like, what the fuck are the characters doing? Everyone, you know what, you wrote, Bob. I can't.
Everyone has a very different style, and honestly, I've been the same in editing some of Bob's stuff as well, because it goes both ways. And everyone has a different style that they write for, and also a different style that they approach editing for. Some people are far more hand-holding than I am, and that is perfectly fine if they have the spoons and if they have the time to do that. I don't have the patience, so I will bluntly go, this is where you were fucked up. Please fix it.
I must admit, so in one thing that I've learned personally is I kind of prefer the editors who do essentially like this is wrong. Can you fix it and stuff like that? Because in the nicest sense, that shame of having to like fix it yourself and stuff like that, it better ingrains the lesson in
it's how
me.
You learn.
It's exactly. You know, if someone's like highlighted all the things of like, this is passive voice, this is passive voice, this is passive voice, then I'm like, okay, fair. I will literally go out of my way to like have checks and balances in place to not inflict this passive voice affliction on anyone else.
What I'll often do in those sort of circumstances is I was actually editing an adventure the other day that it was a 90,000 word campaign.
Oof.
And most of the writing was really clean. It was a copy editing pass I was doing, and it was really clean. It was really good. But one of the two authors had a constant problem of using the word that. And I think that I did a search and brought it from over 800 uses to like 36. I think I spent 3 hours just doing that.
Doing that.
Yeah, but then even though I went in and I did all those changes myself, I also flagged it when I sent the file back of, hey, this is one of the consistent issues that I noticed that you might want to bring up with the writers.
Yeah. No, I again, so like I've got like a cheat sheet. So basically I do my first draft. And now part of my process is literally I go through my cheat sheet of the naughty words and I do my best to kind of, you know, restructure the sentences kind of to remove those. But unless I have that kind of conversation with an editor about like, hey Matt, you need to stop doing this, my dude. I'm like, okay, yes, let's look at it alone.
You don't know unless someone tells you.
No, exactly.
And there's so many things to remember in this industry and in writing for an RPG, because it's so different from any other style of writing.
It's that combination of like technical document and fiction. It's and the sometimes when it kind of blends between the two, it can kind of like this part isn't meant to read like a, you know, a technical manual. This is the evocative part, you know. But geez. So I guess I want to ask what essentially you're like on the editing. Okay, I've got questions. Before we kind of like, you know, pop a pin in the editing conversation, what would you say are like your favorite and least favorite part of the editing process?
Oh, that's a hard question.
I'm also going to ask your favorite and least favorite part of your art process afterwards. So
that's actually easier.
Okay, we
editing. I kind of already touched on this. I love development editing. I love going through and seeing both all of the really clever things that someone has done and finding the ways to enhance those things and pull all of those elements together, and serving as sort of a translator between their mind and the intended audience. My least favorite part of the editing process is the last sixth of whatever document in whatever pass I'm doing.
I do like it. You can be that sort of specific way. It's like, no, it's only the sixth. Like, it's not like the last quarter. It's
it's just that when the finish line is in sight, no matter how big it is, you just know that it's right there, and your mind just goes, do I have to?
I think in fairness though, but when it comes to at least like with adventure content and stuff, obviously the last part is the last six is typically the wrap up and stuff like that, where depending on how things have gone, the DM knows what's happening. Like this is just kind of the bow on top to be like, and they all lived happily ever after. Or
I think that's part of why my brain starts to go, because by that point there isn't a huge amount of cleanup to do.
Yeah,
and if there is, then something's gone real wrong.
Yeah, I feel like, because any kind of the issues you had about like the flow or the player's agency and stuff like that, it's kind of addressed kind of sooner. I guess in larger scale, so take the 90,000 project campaign thing, that I imagine is like the last like I guess it can be depending on the project, because it is either that kind of like nice ribbon on top, or it is that kind of 50,000 different threads coalescing into like a singular kind of point, which you kind of need that like.
Yeah, thankfully for that one, it was a series of linked adventures, so it wasn't quite pull every single thread that we've written in the last 100 pages together. Thank God.
I don't envy some of those things.
It was really enjoyable though. I really liked it.
Nice. Well then, okay, then again, to put this, to go back to an earlier conversation about art, because I didn't ask it then. But when it comes to art, what would you say are like your favorite and least favorite part of that process then?
I think my least favorite is the least favorite of most artists, which is just staring at a blank page. The least favorite thing for any creative, really.
Yeah. I cheat. I use like a template document where I'm never starting from blank.
Yeah, the first thing I always do in a new document when I'm starting a piece of art is change the background color, because then it's at least not white. Which means it's more, it's more forgiving.
Yeah, I like how there's all these like little like mental tricks of like you know small things like that, or like sometimes like when you're feeling unproductive, doing something very small, and then having that task done, you can kind of get into like the flow there and stuff like that. It's weird that we have to trick ourselves to work.
My favorite part of art constantly changes. Currently, I'm on a huge character design kick, but sometimes I'll be really focused on like developing the painterly style that I've been slowly developing over the last 2 years. It really changes.
No, I can imagine, because I think obviously I don't know why it feels like the process of kind of creating art feels a lot more ebb and flowy than because it is kind of working like needing the inspiration and kind of having that kind of more direct translation of mind to paper.
I think the same can be said for RPG writers as well, because sometimes you will really be in the mood for like just bashing out some mechanics, and sometimes you'll really want to do like just a very specific tone of game, and you'll just write it in an afternoon. And sometimes you want to sink your teeth into something bigger and more dramatic, and you'll lose the plot for a few days.
I mean, I think there's always those points where, depending on like different projects, sometimes you almost want the antithesis of like, if you're writing something really dark and gloomy, all your thoughts are like, damn, I would love to just write, I don't know, a clown adventure right now. Like I just
I wallow in any horror that I write. And same with art. In a positive way.
The good one.
I love yes. I will stay there for as long as possible. It is my comfortable pit, even though I am a huge wuss when it comes to watching scary movies.
So sometimes there is that weird, like, again, I'm a big horror wuss as well and stuff like that. But it is weird how, like, even though you are like that creating it feels different from engaging in it. It feels like I can write what's scary, but not be scared in the same way that I would be if I was actually like watching something.
That said, my approach to horror films has changed completely since 2020.
Interesting.
There was just a point in 2020 where I was just like, nothing can hurt me. I can watch a scary movie.
I think it's like in a positive spin of like, I'm so low emotionally that it can't get worse.
I need to feel something, even if it's fear.
So I was gonna say, I'm gonna use what you were saying earlier as a bit of a segue of that ebb and flow of creativity for artists also applying for like writers, to talk about some of the Dreadful Realm stuff, which you've been going, which was the ever successful Kickstarter campaign last year.
The end of 2020. It is quite late at this point, but we are creeping ever closer to it. We were very ambitious unknowingly ambitious in our goals and in the scope, and a number of life events happened since then.
Yeah, but I guess so. For the people listening, what's the general conceit of Dreadful Realms?
So Dreadful Realms is a setting that Kat and I came up with together, actually on my birthday weekend in 2020. We initially saw it as like, we're going to create a Ravenloft setting, and then we wrote about 8,000 words together in the span of 2 days, and then by Sunday evening we were looking at it and going, yeah, this isn't a Ravenloft setting, this is something bigger. And basically it's this it's the first of words. Dreadful Realms is a series that we're intending to make. And so Caverns of the Wise Minister is the first setting within the series. It's all meant to be set in the same world. We've got ideas for the next one. We've had those same ideas for over a year. We just desperately need to finish this one first. But in Caverns of the Wise Minister, the setup is that thousands of years ago, a fairly typical elven city was destroyed, and the survivors fled into the underworld, which is the domain of death, in order to beg the god of death to give their loved ones back. They never made it that far, and instead got waylaid and distracted by the Wise Minister, who is an entity that they have since built up a civilization around. It's a very dark and moody setting. I always hesitate to call it dark fantasy, because dark fantasy brings to mind the idea of like grimdark Game of Thrones and things like that. And there is a lot of, say, one mechanic that we're introducing is a societal mechanic where you have ranks within factions, and those factions are anything from your local neighborhood to actual factions within the city. And dealing with, and that element helps you navigate the different connections throughout the city easier. But so it's a city that is precariously balanced on a web of lies and willful ignorance, and we have a lot of fun in exploring all of the different ways that has created this very broken society that in parts can seem almost idyllic, but also in other parts you scratch the surface and you realize, oh no, terrible things are happening.
I mean, I was just like, there is something about being like just a tabletop RPG writing stuff. I think you always like, people's dream projects kind of always gravitates towards settings. I think it is just because it's that power of like being able to kind of create and kind of like shape like the entire world.
Well, we have honestly been making worlds together our entire marriage. Our entire relationship has been role playing in one way or another.
So then I'm kind of curious then. So with the kind of Dreadful Realms kind of setting world as a whole, what was almost like the point in which you realized, okay, well, the Caverns of the Wise Minister is a sufficient kind of is more than enough, or was it, and then we can kind of expand, or is it more the case of like it was always the Caverns, and then it kind of hit that.
It was always the Caverns, and we realized that it was actually in wanting to give the people of the setting, whether NPCs or characters, more autonomy, that we realized that it couldn't be a Ravenloft setting, because otherwise you start getting into, say, there's one tool that the Wise Minister uses to keep people under its control, which is this delicacy called Silver Roe, which actually comes from the Wise Minister, and people who eat it have develop a low level amount of being mind controlled. And so that is something that we started realizing, if you put that in a fully enclosed setting, it can get squicky in a lot of uncomfortable ways, that because the nature of Ravenloft is so fixed, a realm is what it is, and frankly always will be until adventurers come along. And because of that, the adventurers would always have to have been outsiders, whereas we envision and actively encourage DMs and players that are playing in the Caverns of the Wise Minister, in the setting of Sepulchre, which is the name of the city, to be residents from there, so that they have that intrinsic connection to the city and its people from the very start.
So I guess I'm kind of curious then. So when obviously you and Kat were kind of like coming up with the Caverns as a whole, what kind of, I guess, what did you envision the adventurers kind of getting up to? Well, is it that kind of is everything that's going on with the Wise Minister kind of like a secretive matter, or is it fairly kind of?
So the Wise Minister is considered basically the deity of this realm. So there's a lot of different elements and a lot of different secrets that we have seeded throughout the city and the surrounding area for players to explore, whether it's a whole campaign to discover what the Wise Minister actually is and take it down, because it's got a lot of plans for the city and beyond it that aren't necessarily good for everyone or anyone. But there's also secrets like the cave elves, the elves that were descended from those initial survivors, discovering what becomes of their elders, who frankly turn into giant bat monsters.
I mean, I've said that about my nan for years.
And there's one of those creatures has secrets of his own, and some of the elders are, a number of the elders are still around and still like running the city.
Interesting.
Aren't bat monsters yet.
Ooh.
They have not become bat monsters, and some of them are trying to stave off that change in horrendous ways, and others are simply have not changed. And it's digging into those secrets as well. There's also the Nicks that are my brain children. They're basically alligator merfolk, and they've got and they were the sort of original worshippers of the Wise Minister.
Interesting.
And they have their own backstory for how they came to be that in the underworld. There's also elements of there are portals that keep opening through the city, and just dragging in elements from different places in the world, including an entire forest that appeared 50 years ago.
I love the idea of that, because then it kind of builds on that kind of like organic web of other places that kind of have their own things going on that you can kind of allude to.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of goblins that have sort of actually came into the underworld through similar means, and have fully developed a life and thrived in the underworld in a way that they never did elsewhere. They're little engineers now.
Yeah, I mean,
really cool.
I'm a big like 9 out of 10 Goblin fan. So anything, Goblin Pride, go on, let them thrive however they can.
There are the Uzet, who are basically like ethereal sea slugs that feed on knowledge and are just this incredibly curious race that were pulled from the astral plane. They don't know how they got there. They aren't used to the forms that they're in now. They were very different on the astral plane.
Yeah.
And they are just they're little information sponges.
Yeah. They almost sound adorable, but I have a feeling, depending on how you depict them, they're probably not on the
they are one of the softest parts of the setting. There's a lot of dark, but these are mostly a source of lovely entertainment, except that they do leak acid everywhere.
It can't be all good, can it?
We've also got the Rootless, which are these sort of stone-faced people of all lineages, races, that sort of just stumble into Sepulchre without any memories of who they were, and within like 20 years just become stone statues, and nobody knows where they're coming from.
It sounds like an absolute like network of interconnected mysteries. It sounds
there's so much to explore in it, and there is a reason that it has taken extra time, because frankly we bit off more than we could chew, and we've had to like kind of step back and reassess at times. And at the same time, we also had a team of people who were developing the adventure series to go along, which is a level 1 to 10 campaign. And we realized very quickly that we had to stop writing the setting guide fully until that was fully written, so that we could make sure that all of those connections were in the setting guide itself.
Yeah. I honestly like a setting and like I get like a whole kind of campaign alongside those are huge kind of endeavors, and building two kind of simultaneously. Funnily enough, I went through like a similar process where someone was writing like a 3-part adventure chain while I was doing like the gazetteer. And
cool.
It's that weird kind of interplay where you try and, obviously but you don't want it that case of where like you do your adventure thing over there. You want to have that kind of like
and add to it that when we had initially launched the Kickstarter, the biggest thing that Kat had ever worked on was a Raisman Loft gazetteer, which was massive. He did Calidne and he did Sithicus. Sithicus, I think, was co-written with Ollie, but they were big undertakings, but this was the biggest thing that either of us had ever done. And January, a year ago, he started at Cubicle 7. So several months after we had done the Kickstarter, and we've both sort of, me through osmosis and the joy of just seeing how he does other things now, have grown so much in terms of knowing how to develop a full book. We didn't know what we were doing.
I mean, like
what we were getting ourselves into.
Sometimes, again, it is the nature of the beast where you can't sometimes you can't learn until you do. And so, would you say that, like, I guess in terms of the one of some of the core lessons is literally just in terms of like project scope when approaching that kind of intersection of like, here's a project, here's Kickstarter.
The biggest lesson we have learned, and we kind of knew it at the start, but I take the blame fully for this, was too enthusiastic. Get all of your writing done beforehand. Also, make sure that you build enough money into the budget to pay yourself.
I think 100%. I think sometimes it almost feels like, particularly when you start involving like slightly larger scale collaborations, there is almost that kind of I'm about to call it martyrdom, but
yeah,
that's it.
But a little bit,
because you always want to put, other people who are, dedicating their free time to kind of involve you, kind of want to make sure. But equally, it's your time as well. And sometimes
if you can't afford to sit down and write it or work on the project, then you can't afford to do the project. And that has been the case at times where we've had to sort of focus on the day job or focus on the stuff that actually pays the rent, the mortgage.
But honestly, it sounds like, obviously, like the caverns themselves and the kind of all the kind of world building alongside it does sound like an awesome thing. And
I'm so thrilled with it. The setting guide is I'd say 99% done. There's like a little bit of there's bits and pieces that are getting added in the editing process and the layout process, and I have so much art to do because I'm still playing catch up from completely buggering up both wrists. As soon as we moved in last August, I got RSI.
And I get that. Do you need wrist for being an artist? I didn't.
Who knew you needed
to use your wrist and
just slap my face against the tablet?
It's weird. There's a point in which your art turns all to finger painting, and
unfortunately, fingers are connected to wrists.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You know what? Now I'm here trying to figure it out. Yeah. There's probably still some juice.
Yeah. Even just holding a pen like that, it still puts strain on it.
How
do your stretches, artists?
Yeah. How are your wrists feeling now, by the way?
They're fine. I've been having RSI off and on, but this was full on carpal tunnel in both ones because we moved in and painted an entire room. We painted the bedroom, and then we painted downstairs, and then we spent weeks unpacking, and everything just broke.
So okay, well, so I guess to come back around and pop a capstone on the chat about the Dreadful Realms, then what would you say is something about the setting that is like a point of pride for you, or like you're like that's dope, that's really cool?
So two elements of it. Ooh. I'm gonna cheat and give two answers.
Oh, by all means.
One is the art that I've done. We also have some wonderful art from Dave Markiski and Saga Mackenzie, but a lot of the art is coming from me, and especially things like the portraits of the main NPCs are mine, and I have been working so hard to develop that painterly style to do them justice. The portrait of the High Priestess of the Wise Minster, which is a piece that we have splashed all over the Kickstarter, is actually the first one that I ever properly did in that style.
Yeah.
And I did it over the course of 2 completely manic, hyper-focused days.
Yeah.
And we've got a cover reveal in our latest update. That has her featured again. It's a work in progress. One of the features is still just this sort of scribbled blob in the background. But the other thing that I am immensely proud of is the city guide to Sepulchre itself, because it's come in at probably about 20,000 words. We only expected it to be about 5,000, which was very short-sighted of us.
Yeah.
And I've written about 90% of it myself, which is so much.
Yeah.
And I had never done anything like that. And then we had intended to do it together, and then the presses on our time just fluctuated to the point that it was easier for me to take it on, and do it, and it's been huge and intimidating, and I did it.
Yeah, it's done. Yeah. No, honestly, yeah. I think as well, what says when it comes to like gazetteers and that kind of information, it's always like a fine dance of like there's so much information you could include.
Yeah.
And obviously it feels like you kind of want to give that so much, like to kind of give the world the feeling, and drawing that line of being like, okay, well, what is you know, the DMs or the players actively need in order to, you know, run the setting, versus what would just be what's just cool, what's just awesome. Like I would love to spend, you know, like a good 500 words talking about this really cool statue that comes to life once a day. You know,
there was there's probably a few thousand words devoted to just life in Sepulchre. So things like, how does crime work? How does education work? What do you do with the children? And things like
sorry, what do you do with the children?
It's a fair question. What does society do with their children? Especially because in Sepulchre, it's the realm of the dead, the underworld, and it's just sort of wedged in there. And how do you introduce brand new life to a setting like that? I
mean, also comparatively, we've heard what happens to the old people.
That's only the cave elves.
Okay.
There are plenty of other people out there. But one element that Kat and I brainstormed a lot on was travel through the city. Things like, because it's a very vertical city, and we were very inspired by things like our trip to Prague years ago, where we had stayed in the old town, but we wanted to go to the castle. And not only does that involve crossing the Charles Bridge, it also involves climbing up these like 90-degree hills through this tangled web of back lanes. And that went into a lot of the design. And
I think
it raises questions. It raised questions like, okay, but how do people actually get around? And so we started deciding that it's like a very youthful rebellious thing to do things like hang up rope ladders, or even carve handholds into walls so that you can just scrabble up where you need to instead of going the long way around.
No, it's nice. It always feels like almost like organic when you kind of bring in your own like life experiences, but then applying them within like the context of like a fantasy setting. And again, the idea of like tying that into, you know, a faction or a group of individuals who are like, listen, the rules are you would have to climb this 90-degree hill, but we ain't got time for that. We're just literally gonna, you know, parkour. Jeez.
Basically,
no,
the kids say parkour.
Okay, I mean, I had my hardcore parkour days. I have the dent in my leg to
oh no.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. But
I regularly fall over. I do not attempt parkour.
But honestly, was it law looking at the time? We've done it. We've survived. The relative the relative hour, the normal hour. It doesn't have to be relative to anything like that. But one thing I definitely want to like catch before, you know, we end things is just obviously hearing some of the cool stuff that you're currently working on that's maybe on the horizon, and arguably more importantly, where can people like, you know, stay up to date and stay in the news about your work?
So a lot of my focus at the moment is Dreadful Realms for the up and coming stuff. Also for a fairly small group of people out there watching, we will be at Swansea Comic Con next month, and it's the first con where we will be there just as Extasis Games. Very excited. Where we'll have some Cat's games and we'll have prints, and I'm actually going to be doing some pieces that are sort of posters for his games. Ooh. And I'm quite excited about that. And we will also be at UK Games Expo in June.
Right around the corner.
Yeah. It's so soon. Let's see. What else? I can be found on Twitter. That's my main unfortunate hellscape. I'm at crit_law, and it's the same, I think, on Instagram, where mostly you will get pictures of custom dolls.
Nice. Yeah.
Everyone needs their hobby that they also try to pay the bills with.
Well, I was gonna say, was it also like when you're at like conventions and stuff, you normally typically have like a few dolls. I've seen some of your.
I did a dragon meet. Yeah, that was actually the first con that I ever sold anything at, and it was a lot of fun. And we were crammed together. There were like 6 of us, and we were all on this one table. Usually only 2 of us behind the table at any time, but yeah.
Yeah, you want to have like an ongoing like row and stuff like that. But yeah, I think with like working conventions is never comfy in the traditional.
I love conventions in principle, but I found that I far prefer having people come to me. I will sit there and I will greet them as they arrive.
Yeah. No, it's like, there's a lot of walking otherwise. Yeah, it's nice to just like
There's so many crowds.
Well, honestly, Laura, thank you so much for taking this time to have the chat. It's been awesome.
Thank you.
I've really
it's been lovely.
Other than that, what was it? I've been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes. I don't think I have anything coming out soon. I probably do. I don't know. I don't know.
But did you have it come out recently though, Matthew?
Did I have anything that come out?
I don't know. Recently,
I did indeed. Yeah, it was it. We had the Tome of Silence, the attack of the Astral sound Devourers. It's a wizard. You did the offer it.
I did.
I must admit, we probably should have spoken about that before. Either way, no. Honestly, it's a fantastic little adventures that Law lovingly brought to life. These weird snake boys, and who will
terrible snake boys.
Yeah, they will eat the sound out of your mouths. And if you want to find out more about that, there'll be a link in the description to find out a little bit more. Dude, thank you for setting me up for that. But it brings me to my last question, which is a bit of a surprise. But Law, how do you end a podcast?
I don't know.
Okay.
You just go silent and wait for them to go away.
Okay.